Dennis McConaughey, former Executive Vice President of Corporate Development at TransCanada, and the author of the book titled Dysfunction Canada After Keystone XL. It's nice to see you again, sir. Notley has said this isn't a fight between Alberta and BC. This is a fight between BC and Canada. Do you think she has a point?
Well, I think she has a point to say that a federal determination of a pipeline being in the national interest has to be supported. It has to be stood behind. And that's really what's, I think, all of Alberta expects to be done here, and expects the Prime Minister of Canada to say that their own decision is going to be unequivocally stood behind. And that takes more than just rhetoric. It takes ensuring that any legal efforts to not start construction are dealt with, that civil disobedience is dealt with, and that through all of this, reminding Canadians that these issues of the degree of the spill risk and the environmental issues related to this project have already been adjudicated and have been signed off by the National Energy Board and accepted by a democratically elected government, determining this is in the best interest of Canada. So I think Alberta is right to expect of the Canadian Prime Minister to stand behind his own decision.
Okay, and I can understand their pressure on Ottawa to do that, but then you go back to Victoria, and the BC Premier is saying, look, we want to do another study. We want to make sure we have the numbers right before we increase the volume of bitumen that's coming into our ports, and we're going to slow down or stop any increase in flow into our province until we have that. His quote today was, I don't see what the problem is. It's within our jurisdiction to put in place regulations to protect public interests, and that's what we're doing. Doesn't he kind of have a point?
No, he doesn't. He absolutely does not. He has no respect for due process. These issues were adjudicated by the level of government that had jurisdiction for the pipeline approval and the related marine interfaces. I mean, this goes to the very point of what is due process in this country. When is yes ever yes? And another point that I think certainly a business audience would relate to, how is Kinder Morgan thinking about what does it mean to be investing in this country literally billions of dollars when you never know if you have yes for an answer, that you're subject to endless revisionism, which is all basically rooted in obstruction of any growth in the Alberta oil sands on the basis of concerns about spill risks that are fundamentally unreasonable. And if people credibly want to make an argument that the National Energy Board doesn't have competence and integrity, well, that's an utterly ridiculous accusation. And so the point really here is it's not just standing behind your own decision, but it's standing behind your own jurisdiction. So quite frankly, I think the BC government was utterly out of line. And at some point, all Canadians have to defer to their existing legal processes. And remember, Trans Mountain was adjudicated for close to 4 years. And we need to defer to the decisions that have already been made in respect of it.
But here's the problem, though, is we have this process that's in place. I guess people used to agree that it was the final say, and that when it was sort of finished and regulated, that's how we proceeded. That's no longer the case. We have demonstrators shutting down the entirety of discussions at those hearings in Montreal. We have the province of BC now sort of raising questions about what they can do to sort of do end runs around it. Do we need to revisit the process and come up with something that all parties, even those who do disagree, can agree on a way forward, and when a final say is said, that we can actually get something built?
Well, I think that question is really fundamentally unreasonable. We do not need, as a country, to endlessly revisit processes that have run close to 4 years, that have been conducted by competent regulatory entities based on actual technocratic and scientific data that has been adjudicated that the risks of spills are imminently reasonable and not inconsistent with what other risks are taken by other countries in other parts of the world. And notwithstanding that we're moving dilbit as opposed to other forms of crude oil.
Right.
I mean, it goes to the very heart of whether you can trust any investment in this country if you're constantly subject to trying to get the sign-off of entities in this country that are implacably against any hydrocarbon development.
Right.
A country that allows that to continue is going to lose investment. And that's really, I think, at the heart of just how visceral and how difficult this is for all Albertans to bear.
All right, listen, we're going to have to leave it there, but always appreciate your insight. Dennis McConney, the former Executive Vice President of Corporate Development at TransCanada, a veteran of the energy industry, and the author of the book titled Dysfunction Canada After Keystone XL.